Thank you so much for joining us as we embark on the next level of how might programs look. Some of us, I recognize your faces as familiar supporters at previous programs. You might remember when we were serving soup to 100 or 10 and calling it turtle soup and coming on a Sunday afternoon for learning forums. It's been a careful comeback and a careful evolution of education. And so today we have a limited audience, and we appreciate your patience with us trying to manage some social distance in these changing days. And at the same time that we have it's a really great to see a group in front of me again. It's been since March 13th last year that we had a program where I could actually stand in front of a group of folks like yourselves and actually be able to interact. So I'm excited to be able to actually look into people's faces versus staring into a Zoom camera. We are proud that we kept doing programs at the Journey. And if you're not familiar, go to journeymuseum.org and you can find our Journey discussions there. They're free, they're on demand. You can see all kinds of programs that we kept at it throughout the pandemic. Putting stuff out there for folks to be able to learn more about our area and our community and the people here. And so we persevered, and we can't thank our members and our friends of the museum enough. And if you're not currently a member or a friend, please consider becoming a member, because that helps, that shows us that we're doing the right things, that we're hanging in there and we're doing what you want to see in the community. This is such an important day in Black Hills Rapid City history, June 9th, because of the events that occurred on 1972. And we felt like this was the program to come out with something different where we could host an audience. Our curator, Christianson's in Pierre, South Dakota, broadcasting. And we also have about an equal number of you watching on Zoom Live, which is why I'm wearing this headset. And we have a camera. So our idea of how to interact with audience has certainly changed a lot from when we would have 20 people upstairs in a bowl of soup to now I'm speaking with a TEDx microphone set into a Zoom camera. Corey's in Pierre broadcasting live, and we'll record this so it'll be available at journeymuseum.org and you can watch it later. And again, I encourage you there, but my heart swells with pride to see the theater with, I think, probably the number that we said we were going to be able to host. And I know, again, we've got an equal live audience that's out there. A little bit more about what's coming up, just so that you guys have this on your calendar. Again, you can find all this. But in the month of June, we're going to have on Wednesday, June 23rd, Eliza Blue will be here in the theater. And she has a book called The Accidental Rancher. She's also on South Dakota Public Broadcasting on a program called Wish You Were Here. So she's a musician, she's a poet, and she is going to talk about soil conservation and land management. She's a young lady who grew up in a fairly populated area and now lives in Bison, South Dakota. So her worldview and her perspectives of things have definitely been reshaped, which is why she calls herself the Accidental Rancher. This program is sponsored, Eliza's program is sponsored by South Dakota Humanities Council. There'll be no admission, and it'll be similar to this. So if you can't get here to the theater, we'll be broadcasting it and recording it. And then 2 days later, June 25th, which is another date that for our museum, we always have tried to have a program, and that is, it's the anniversary date, commemoration date of the Battle of Little Bighorn, or as it was known in the Native American culture, the Battle of Greasy Grass. And for the past 7 years, I've had Donovan Sprague speak here. And, Donovan brings a completely different perspective of what occurred at Little Bighorn to the conversation, because he's a descendant of warriors such as Hump and Crazy Horse. And so he brings the Native American perspective to the Battle of Little Bighorn. And, there is no historic event that has more books written about it than this particular battle. But There's probably about 1% of those books that might have been written from a Native American perspective. So I'm always proud to have Donovan come in here on that day. And he prides himself in making, and if you've seen Donovan before, you haven't seen this year's program. So even though I've said he's been here 7 years in a row, says he's got new information and new research because he's constantly researching the content. And he always does a great program, but he loves to answer the questions, even if the questions have been asked before. So again, both of these are being underwritten by South Dakota Humanities, which when we wrote the grant, it was in November or December, and who knew for sure what was going to happen. So part of what we wanted to make sure we could do is, even if we couldn't afford to put programs on, we had underwriting and we had stuff in place. And so I thank the South Dakota Humanities Council for jumping in so that we can have these kind of programs. I know today there's been surveys out here, and we're going to keep talking about surveys. If you're not getting our emails, our education committee is talking about surveys. We're trying to figure out, what does this fall look like, right? As we all do things here, what's the next step? Is this how our education programs will look? Will they be theaters and Zoom all combined? Will we go back to Zoom? These are all the questions that no one really has the answer to. I appreciate the patience of our directors as my chair walks in here. Dr. Chris Heacock, give her a round of applause, please. Give Dr. Heacock a round of applause, because she has taught me that it's okay to say, I don't know. And I've said, I don't know a lot since March 13th, 2020. But what we've done is we've stayed after it. And I guess that's the important part of all of this. And that's the mission of the Journey Museum. Exit stage left, Alyssa says. See, I got to adjust to everything now. It's not just you guys, it's the camera too. So make sure you fill out surveys. Also in the audience today, Samantha Slocum from the Rapid City Public Library. Samantha and I are part of a committee for the mayor's office, and we're looking for feedback on what are the right things to do for our community on the 50th. So that's why we're gathering things on survey, but also, if you leave this and kind of go home and think about it, connect back with us one way or the other too. We want to do all the right things. We definitely want to make sure that we honor the lives that were lost on this day. It was a tragic day, but one of the things we also hope that we message in all of this is just how doggone resilient Rapid City is as a community, some of the fantastic leadership that occurred. And, what we enjoy today in this community has a lot to do with what happened in 1972. And how do we continue to educate the younger members of our community so they know what we have and why we have it this way? I think that's all part of our missions between the public library and the Journey Museum and Learning Center. And, this year is the 49th. To me, there's no year that's more special than others, but I guess 50s and 25s sometimes ring out there a little stronger. But I think every year is important because we live in a community where this happened, and its community itself has been reshaped because of the event. So hopefully you guys won't hold back on providing us feedback and information after today's program. So let me introduce Corey Christianson. In all things that are not so weird anymore. 5 years ago when Corey came to work here, she wore a lot of different hats: customer service, education. Eventually she became our ace. I'll let her explain what an ace is later. Today now she lives in Pierre, South Dakota, which has not seemed to change any bit of our work relationship, because after you've been quarantined and nobody's in a building for 100+ days, and then you're here for fun fact, we were open 159 days out of last year. The year before we were open 361. So quite a bit different world that we all lived in last year. And I know it affected all of us, but it doesn't seem weird to have an employee in Pierre that I have a meeting with on Zoom now. She used to have an office next door, and that was, we'd meet weekly, but now we're constant. Our biggest issue now is which time zone are we in, right? But Corey has carried on basically for 5 years, has been researching the flood and the history, and we've had a number of interns. Corey will talk about that. She's a graduate of the University of South Dakota, so let's hear it for the Coyotes. And she has a master's from the University of Oklahoma in museum studies. So we got to give her credit for being in the field that she wants to be. She's also working at the Cultural Heritage Center in Pierre right now, while she moonlights or continues her relationship with us. And for fun, Corey likes to get after the kids and coach swimming in Pierre. So she's engaged in a lot of things. And I know she's literally given thousands of hours of time out at the Air and Space Museum while she was a member here in Rapid City. So she has a really strong military history. And Corey was a little nervous, so I'm going to out her right here. She was like, well, when was the last time I did a program? And I said, well, it would have had to have been like in 2019. But she did do a Zoom program in October with us. So would you guys all welcome Corey Christianson? I think she can hear you clapping.
Well, hopefully everybody can hear me. Hi, everybody. To those of you on Zoom and in the theater, I miss seeing everybody's face in person. Just have to get that out of the way right now. I do miss everybody. I am very, very proud to be able to do this presentation for you today. So I'm going to share my screen here. We today are going to be talking about the 1972 Black Hills flood. Obviously, this year marks the 49th commemoration of the flood. 49 years ago today, a huge tragedy happened in the Black Hills. We do refer to it as the Black Hills flood and not the Rapid City flood, even though people do refer to it as the Rapid City flood sometimes. But the Journey Museum and Learning Center feels that, as we say, the Black Hills flood, because it did hit Keystone, it hit Nemo, it hit bits and pieces of Sturgis, Box Elder, a huge area of the Black Hills, which is why we refer to it this way. I know Troy said something about my title, ACE. My title is Administration, Curations, and Exhibit. So that's where that comes from. It's just a mouthful. So general information on the Black Hills flood. We definitely talk about this quite often. We have this conversation quite often. This event happened on June 9th, 1972. Over 230 lives were lost. This does include over 17 first responders. And first responder, it depends on your definition of a first responder, which is why we say over or under a certain number. But that does include National Guard, Air Force, police, fire department, as well as community service organizations, Salvation Army, that sort of thing. 1 million metric tons of rain fell over the Black Hills, which equates about 220.5 million pounds of rain. This falling of water, so this rainfall occurred from 5 a.m. on June 9th to about 12:15 a.m. on June 10th. So pretty much the whole day was stormy and rainy. It didn't get really bad until the evening, but we will talk about the weather forecast and that sort of thing as we go along in this presentation today. There was $165 million worth of damage done in 1972. So in today's, the equivalent in today's standards would be over $1 billion. This damage does include 5,000 cars that were demolished and 200 businesses lost. 1,335 homes were ruined. A lot of them were along the banks of Rapid Creek. And then there was a 93% loss of utilities in Rapid City. So that is specific to Rapid City. Most were restored within 7 days, but that was around the clock work for MDU and Black Hills Energy and similar organizations who were doing that recovery process. So when I do the timeline, keep in mind that this is a very, it is a shorter timeline. There is a lot more information in between each time that you see on the screen. And I'm going to fill in where I can. So 6 p.m., rain began to fall at rates of 2 to 6 inches per hour. That was concentrated between Pactola Reservoir and Rapid City. And at 7:15, a flash flood warning was issued by the National Weather Service for the northern Black Hills. By 8 p.m., the River District Office advised the National Weather Service office in Rapid City to expand the warning southward to include Rapid City. So we are talking about a pretty fast-moving storm, pretty fast-moving rainfall over the Black Hills area. By 9 p.m., water level at Canyon Lake Dam rises about 12 feet in 3 hours. 10:15 p.m., Rapid Creek overtops its banks. Now, we are talking about a creek that runs through Rapid City, and this creek has overflowed. So we are already getting flooding. We are getting, people are having issues getting to their houses, from their houses. There is chaos beginning as this timeline occurs. And then at 11:15 p.m., Rapid Creek flood level peaked at a stage of 15.77 feet or 15 feet 9 inches. Now, in these hours, what was also occurring was response to calls for service. There would be rescues happening throughout Rapid City and the surrounding area. We are talking about people losing their cars, losing their homes, being separated from families, and some people passing away in this time. So this, while on screen, it's just words on a screen, and we're talking about it, but do keep in mind that there were events occurring in between each spot that were tragic. And that's what makes this flood so intense, was how quickly things were happening and what happened. So at 12:15, a flood crest estimated at about 50,000 cubic feet per second reached downtown Rapid City. And then from 12:15 to about 5 a.m., it was dark. Like we said, 93% of utilities had been knocked out, so there wasn't really any lights, but there were downed power lines and fires and rescues attempted and all of these things. And then by 5 a.m., Rapid Creek has returned to within the banks of the stream. This map kind of shows the width of the water. So you can see Rapid Creek there in the middle, and it goes about approximately 528 feet outside of the banks of Rapid Creek. And at the corner, so you can see where the Journey Museum and Learning Center is on the map, at that corner, the water was at 6 feet, and that is visible thanks to a marker on the Journey Museum and Learning Center sign at the corner now. And it is put there, I believe it was put there by USGS, so it is accurate in location. So today we wanted to discuss a little bit more about floodplains and about green spaces in Rapid City. This is not to take away from the tragedy that occurred during the flood. We want to express different facts about the flood. And so this year we're talking about floodplains and green spaces. So the FEMA regulated floodplain is defined as a water surface boundary that is created during the 100-year storm event. And while that doesn't make, the first time I read that, it didn't make a lot of sense to me. This means that if there is a storm intensity large enough to occur one time in 100 years on average. This is also known as a 1% storm, as in any given year, there is a 1% chance that we will see a storm like that occurring. What that does not mean is it does not mean that when a storm happens, it won't be seen again for another 100 years. In fact, in the 1900s in Rapid City area, just about every decade or so for a good stretch of time, there was a storm like this, and it's traceable. So it is easily seen, easily tracked through newspapers. The 500-year floodplain is the same way. On average, it's 1 in every 500 years or so that a storm of that intensity occurs. I believe that would be 0.02%. So there's a 0.02% chance every year for a storm of that intensity to occur. So the Rapid City flood, it wiped out a huge amount of livable space in Rapid City along the creek. And this would include homes, it included trailer parks, all of these different housing developments, housing areas were wiped out due to the water that came down from the hills into Rapid City after Canyon Lake Dam failed. After the flood, there was a meeting where Leonard Swanson, who you can see on the screen, he was quoted as the saying, "We cannot sentence the survivors to one more night near the creek in the suicidal floodplain." He was the public works director from 1971 to 1975 for Rapid City. And Leonard Swanson was absolutely correct. The city then and there decided that from that point on that nobody would be able to live that close to the Rapid Creek. So what they decided was they would track out the floodplain and make those areas green spaces. Now, if you are local to Rapid City, you know exactly what we are talking about when it comes to green spaces. We are talking about the areas along Rapid Creek that are now full of bike paths and parks. There is frisbee golf areas. There's a golf course closer to Canyon Lake. Of course, Canyon Lake was fixed up, but in the range of about 600 additional acres of Rapid City parks were created in the aftermath of the 1972 flood. That number is an estimate, a rough estimate, a rough guess. This is the reasoning for the changing in housing. This is why today when people ask why they can't live close to Rapid Creek, this would be the answer. It is because it is a safety issue. Even with technology we have today, even with the information, the better predictions of weather, we all know that South Dakota weather changes at the drop of a hat anyway. But even with the predictions of weather and what we have in place for safety protocols now, it is safer to not live in a floodplain than it is to live in a floodplain. So what I believe is the rule is that if you have a business within the floodplain, that's okay. And I believe that there are businesses that just edge the floodplain, but no one is allowed to live in it. And I would like to inform you guys also about the research that the Journey Museum and Learning Center has been doing. I have been extremely lucky in the past 5 years to be able to do research into the 1972 flood. A little background on me. I have lived in South Dakota for 10 years now. I graduated from the University of South Dakota in 2014, and obviously I started in 2011. So I am definitely not a South Dakota native. I am not a South Dakota born and raised. However, I do deem it home, and I do enjoy doing research about it. So when I found out that there was a flood in Rapid City, it was fascinating to me. I wanted to learn everything I could, and I think Troy knew that, and that's why he kind of put me in place to do some of this research. It has not only been me doing this research though. So I've been able to oversee 4 different interns in the time that the Journey Museum and Learning Center has been focused on 1972 Black Hills flood research. We've been collecting photographs, focusing on tourism, focusing on Storybook Island, different aspects of the story that maybe haven't always been told. So at the beginning of doing research into the 1972 Black Hills flood, the Journey Museum and Learning Center had an intern by the name of Casey Sullivan. I don't know if he's on the Zoom call right now, but if he is, Casey, what's up? He is now up in Keystone doing, being the executive director of the Keystone Historical Society, if I'm not mistaken. But Casey, his initial job was to locate and find photos of the victims of the 1972 Black Hills flood. We did not have all of the photos of the victims who died in the flood, and so we were still looking for some of them. We are still looking for more. We are missing about 118 by our last count. And these photos and this information can actually be found on the library website. And luckily, the library and the Journey Museum and Learning Center has been working closely together to keep that updated. Every time we find photos, we let them know and they connect it. And so we have been keeping that updated and up to speed. But Casey found, I want to say he found 60 or 70 photos of victims that we didn't have before. So we were very lucky to have him doing that research for us and helping us with that research. Other aspects, the tourism, I know that sounds kind of strange that we've done that research, but what that tourism research was focused on was how did COVID-19 affect tourism versus how did the 1972 Black Hills flood affect tourism. And what's fascinating about the tourism aspects is that the governors both reacted in very similar ways. So I'm sure everybody remembers when Governor Noem came out and said, the Black Hills are still open, South Dakota's still open for tourism, we would love to have your business. In 1972, Governor Knipe essentially said the same thing. There is a newspaper article dated very soon after the flood that said, parts of Rapid City are closed, but the Black Hills are still open, Mount Rushmore is still there, and we would love to have business. So we did a lot of comparing and contrasting on how the governors reacted, what the differences were. And Katie Zimmer, who is a graduate student at the University of South Dakota, really helped us with that. We also did research into Storybook Island. Storybook Island used to be in a different spot than it is now. Some of the Storybook Island figurines are still originals from the 1972 flood, and they were actually, or from prior to the 1972 flood, and they are actually, they survived the flood, they were repainted and put into the new Storybook Island. So we have research on that, and Jacob Linsman did research for us for that. We are continuing digging into the tourism aspect a little bit just because COVID-19 is ongoing and we are still trying to learn the impacts of COVID-19 on tourism. But that's kind of the past research that we've done. Presently, and that, by the way, if you don't recognize the gentleman on the screen, that is Mayor Don Barnett as a young man. He was the mayor during the 72 flood, and then he was the mayor right afterwards during some of the other chaos that happened in the Black Hills in the same time frame. So he actually did a lot for Rapid City, for the Black Hills area during and after the flood. Present research and why we're learning about it, why we're talking about it. Right now we have an intern by the name of Kyle Krebs. He is a Black Hills State University student. He works at Wind Cave Park, and he has been helping us do some research on leadership, on the Vision Fund, and he will be working on FEMA as well. But why are we talking about leadership? Everybody knows that there was Don Barnett, there were other great leaders. We don't have the whole story on all of those leaders yet. And so we are trying to gather bits and pieces of information that we might be missing. We are trying to gather bits and pieces of information that may not have been heard of before. We're still verifying who the actual leaders were. When I say actual leaders, I mean those who were in leadership positions, so mayors and colonels and people in charge of the bomb wing and those sorts of people, versus individuals who may have taken leadership control during the chaotic event itself. People who may not necessarily be recognized because they don't have that actual title behind their name. And so Kyle is helping us work on that. He's also helping us collect images of these individuals. He has been in contact recently with the South Dakota National Guard, and he is gathering as much information as he possibly can from them. The Vision Fund and FEMA are also very important aspects of research that we are tackling. The Vision Fund, of course, was formatted in 1992, and so Kyle is digging through city records, city transcripts, meeting transcripts on the formation of the Vision Fund, exactly why they were formed, and exactly who benefited and how they benefited. Of course, the Journey Museum and Learning Center is one building that was created thanks to the Vision Fund, as is the Doll Fine Arts Center. And so the I don't want to say repercussions, but the word is eluding my brain at the moment. The benefits of the Vision Fund are still very visible in the community today. And then FEMA obviously is a disaster relief organization. FEMA, we have heard bits and pieces of rumors that FEMA was created as a direct result of the 1972 Black Hills flood. And so obviously, in order to make sure that's the truth, we have to do some research into that. We do have proof of other, how do I want to phrase it? We do have proof of other laws and bills being passed through Congress due to the flood. So there is a good possibility that FEMA was created in response to the flood, as well as a couple of other tragedies occurring at in the same relative time frame as well. And then victims are up here, and there's 238 victims. We are verifying those victims. We are making sure that we know who they are. We know I have a extensive Excel spreadsheet with each victim's name on it. We're verifying who they are. We're verifying where they lived. We're verifying, how many times have they been documented in newspapers from that time frame? These different aspects of research, we're trying to cover all the bases. And so that is why victims are on the present research, and that's why you'll see them on the future research aspect slide as well. Another aspect of leadership that Kyle is digging into, and it's kind of fascinating, is the cooperation. So we all know that Ellsworth and the National Guard and the police department and the fire department and emergency management and all of these groups of people collaborated. They worked together. We're trying to find the notes behind that. We're trying to find the direct information that said, Colonel Corning called the bomb wing commander. You know, these three individuals had conversations together at this time and made these decisions. We're kind of looking for that information as well. That information is a little bit harder to get a hold of because when you read the Ellsworth report and when you read the National Guard report, it reads the exact same way. So there are some, there is somewhere in that conversation they decided this is what we're going to say, this is how we're going to phrase it, that sort of thing. So we're trying to find those conversations because in order to express the importance of this leadership, we have to understand what actually occurred. I would like to say the Journey Museum and Learning Center is not questioning the decisions that these leaders made. That is not our place. Nor do we think that any decision made was the wrong one by any means, because this tragedy occurred so quickly that they were moving on the fly for about 12 hours straight. But it is a way to understand and to communicate the importance of those decisions if we understand the movements up to those decisions being made, if that makes sense. So future research, upcoming plans. Obviously, we're confirming victims still. We have been very lucky to work with the Rapid City Police Department and the Pennington County Sheriff's Department on confirming victims, as well as being able to trace information from missing persons, from Chuck Childs, who was a probation officer with the sheriff's office. He was put in charge of missing persons, and he dwindled that list down to about 5 missing persons at the end of it all, which is a span of about 5 months that he had that time frame. And so we've been very lucky to work with those two organizations, those two community service groups to help us continue to confirm victims and make sure we're doing everything correctly. We're also still collecting photos of victims. Like I said, we're missing about 118 at my last count. And then we are thinking about doing a artifact collection day. If you guys fill out that survey, maybe note whether or not you'd be interested in that. When we're talking about artifacts, though, we're going to have a very specific outline of what artifacts we are actually looking for. Because I can tell you that the Journey Museum and Learning Center has about 6 copies of each newspaper given at that time. And so we would hopefully try to get artifacts other than newspapers in for collection, for research, and for perhaps display, perhaps. And then next year is the 50th commemoration. I would like to talk for a second on why we say commemoration instead of anniversary. Anniversary is such a positive word. And not that commemoration is not a positive word, but anniversary brings to mind parties and the Journey Museum and Learning Center. Troy and I had the conversation of what would be a better word than anniversary, and we believe it's commemoration, because we are commemorating those who died. We are remembering those who were lost. We were remembering the sacrifices that those first responders made. We are remembering the tragedy that occurred, and then we are looking forward to the future. So that is why Commemoration was chosen for the Journey Museum when we present it. The Journey Museum and Learning Center at this point in time is working on a new exhibit. We are in the process of designing an exhibit, which is why on the survey, you'll be able to fill out what would you like to see within that exhibit? What information do you think we've missed before? I would love to hear it, especially because as the Journey Museum and Learning Center, and specifically I work on the exhibit, we would love to be able to incorporate things that the public would like to see. I believe we are working on a new video regarding the 1972 flood. And I guess I probably should have confirmed that with Troy beforehand, but the new video on the 1972 flood, we are hoping to put new information in it. And that's part of the research that the Journey Museum and Learning Center has been doing. And then we have a huge desire to educate and commemorate. And that is the bottom line, is next year, the 50th commemoration, the Black Hills area is still a tourist attraction. We would love to be able to educate visitors, educate those who come in, educate locals who may not understand, especially people my age who may not understand the importance of the flood. The Journey Museum and Learning Center strives to educate and commemorate the Black Hills flood. So how can you help? Well, I'm so glad Sam Slocum is there, because I don't have the website memorized, and she may not either. But the photos of victims, like I said, again, we are still missing about 118 of them by my last count. If you have photos of the victims and you don't see them online, please email me. Please email them to Troy or send them to Sam. We would love to have them. Artifact donation, like I said, if the Journey Museum and Learning Center figures out a way to do a safe and specific artifact donation, we will put that out in a press release. We will put it in, hopefully in the newspaper. You will be able to hear about it, and hopefully someone comes up with something. Fill out the survey. Please let us know what you would like to see within the exhibit. Please let us know what you would like to see for the 50th commemoration for the larger Rapid City area. Like Troy said, he and Sam are on a group from the mayor's office, and so I'm sure that information would be spread appropriately and accordingly. And then please talk about the flood in safe ways. I need to say that. Talk about the flood, talk about the commemoration. Please keep in mind that the Journey will always be talking about it. We will always be commemorating the flood every year, including next year. And so that's very important as well.
Folks, we have a microphone that we can hand around the theater here so that you can ask a question of Corey. And we're well aware of the fact that we didn't spend a ton of time on the whole history story of this, rather spending time kind of educating you as far as what we've been doing here at the museum, always with an eye towards the 50th, to be perfectly honest with you. There's just so much content to work on. So to Corey's own words, you know, if you guys have got specific questions about something that happened that you'd like to ask, we can certainly handle that. Alexa over here has a microphone. Just raise your hand. I have fielded a couple questions in the moderation chat. And so those who are online, you can continue to send questions there. But Corey, I'll start off with a question
Sure.
that came in earlier, and it was in alignment with the floodplain. The comment was, it took a lot of local courage to establish the floodplains through or the Greenway through the city. In your research, did you ever find any pushback of people opposed to this idea of the Greenway? Was there ever any criticism or pushback when it came to this concept?
So there was. So the general answer to that question is yes. There was pushback. It did take a lot of courage. A lot of the people who lived along, there was a large, no, pause, I need to rephrase. There was a large Native American population that lived in Rapid City that lived along Rapid Creek. And when the flood wiped out housing, there was a lack of housing for a lot of people. And so the critics didn't slink away, but there were a lot of conversations about where else can people live? What else needs to be built? Is there fair money going back to people of different ethnicities? Is there fair money for people of different races? It was a large conversation about equality, a large conversation about housing, and there was a large population that moved away from Rapid City because of it, because they couldn't live back where they were, or they couldn't find necessary housing after the flood.
No, I just wanted to comment a little bit. Corey, we miss you out here.
Wait, who is that?
I'm not going to tell you.
Bill Casper.
Bill Casper.
For some of you that weren't here during the flood, it was a rather unique experience. I lived in Dark Canyon until January of 1972 in a spot where the canyon was fairly narrow, and we noticed the debris on the wall along the other side of the creek by the house was 25 feet deep where it went through there. But I taught at Cleghorn School, which was an elementary school just outside of town for some of you that know where it was. And if you go across the bridge on Canyon Lake and head up toward the chapel in the hills, there was a tremendous concentration of houses in an area called Jackson Park. And if you read the plaques of those that perished, there are a lot of names. I lost a lot of former students. I taught there at Cleghorn from 65 to 69. And one of the 5 that's never been recovered, a Crowder boy, was one of my students. Those of you that were here remember the haze, the brown green haze that hung over town for days afterwards. And then you hate to bring this up, but the smell of decay that just hovered here. It was an experience I think that those of us who are old enough to remember will never forget.
Corey, so another question that came in online is the 1972 Black Hills flood still the largest loss of life from natural precipitation causes in U.S. history?
So it's not the largest loss of life from natural precipitation caused flooding. Obviously, many hurricanes down in Louisiana take that, but it is the largest loss of life for river flooding in U.S. history. I believe it is still today. Oh, I was asked, sorry, I was asked if the 1972 Black Hills flood is still the largest loss of life from a natural precipitation caused flood in U.S. history. So I believe that it is still the largest loss of life due to a river flood in the United States. I don't believe it is the largest loss of life due to precipitation causes.
Okay, we're gonna have a question in the theater next.
Okay.
My name is Gene LeBrun. I was here during the flood. I was a great friend of Mayor Barnett, and after the flood, Don approached me and asked me if we would represent the city in all of the aftermath of the flood. So I worked very closely with Don and the city council for many years afterwards. We helped acquire all the property that was acquired after the flood. I worked with Swanee, Joe Bailey, Sheriff Glenn Best, all of them. I'd be happy to visit with any of you anytime you'd like, because most of the people I remember very well. I'm sorry there aren't too many of us left, but it was a long, hard process and we went through a lot. I'd be happy to spend some time with anybody who'd like to spend some time with me, tell more of the details we worked with over that time.
Troy, could you get that gentleman's information, please?
We won't
after-
get him out of here.
Thank you.
Well, this is Ken Reed. I'm sitting behind Gene here. And I heard the comment about the pall that lay over the city for the several days afterward. And I think one thing that's never been mentioned or talked about much was the meteorological occurrences before the flood. And the haze that was over the Black Hills for at least 2 days. The humidity was extremely high, and it was hot and humid. And that is, that's a little bit unusual for the Black Hills area. And so I just remember as a young man, just sweating out there in the days before the flood. And then also being, of course, all of our experiences during the flood. So.
I do know, obviously, I was not around during the 1972 flood, but I have been told that it was hugely humid, hugely overcast, and it was essentially the perfect storm of events occurring that caused this. And I believe the general consensus is that cloud seeding did not have an effect on the rainfall that day. Just wanted to throw that one out there.
So while we might be moving the microphone around, interesting chat was sent through that there, and Corey, I don't know if we've ever talked about it, but that there's oral history transcripts from South Dakota National Guard members. The interviews were conducted by Dr. Robert Webb, who was a history professor at Northern State University, and he was serving with the South Dakota National Guard. That might be something for us to pursue.
That may be at the University of South Dakota, but that may also be at Northern State University. And I've not looked at Northern State University's archives, but I definitely will now. Thank you, Mr. Super.
As I mentioned, I lived down in Dark Canyon before the flood, and there was a vacant lot to the west of us. And in that lot were 3 40-foot long, 12-inch I-beams laying there. I don't know what for. But to me, the power of the flood was shown. Those beams were picked up and moved probably 50 or 75 feet. And they had nothing attached to them. It wasn't like a trailer or something that could float. These were heavy, long I-beams. The power of the flood was just terrific. And some of you that remember friends that lived above the Canyon Lake Dam when the dam went out, talking about hearing screams of people that were being swept along in the flood. It was a horrible evening.
Bill, I'm so grateful to you for sharing this information that you have. And definitely, if I can picture what you're talking about with the beams, that does definitely show the power of the water there, because it was just incredible.
I'll forgive you, but I'm still upset that they're not here.
I'm sorry.
I wanted a hug.
I know, I'm sorry.
I don't know if that's socially acceptable yet, Bill. Okay. Is there any other questions that we have? No. Okay.
Just a comment, I guess. I've never given the oral history that I went through and my best friend during the flood, but I think I probably will for the 50th. But it involves Swanee, and I see Steve and Becky are here, and I was at Canyon Lake the night of the flood, and I'm pretty certain that Leonard came by. He and my father were close friends, and so I knew him. And it just seems to me like he was the one that had the keys to unlock the gates so that we could open the gates at Canyon Lake as full as we could, because the dam was controlled by these big metal gates that slid up and down. And we opened those gates as wide as we possibly could, and it was still not near enough. Things were getting jammed in there. We were taking poles and running things through. The paddle boats came loose from their moorings, and they floated down. They hit the dam, and the concrete and steel just shook. And we got some of those through there, but the final straw was when there was a house that had apparently broken free and was floating in the lake, floated down, and it got stalled in the dam. And at that time, I think Swanee had left before then. Black Hills Power and Light truck with the lights only light that we had, they had left, and we decided to leave. And that was, as near as we can tell, somewhere around a little after 11. And I don't know if anybody has an exact time when the dam let go, but I know the water was within a few feet of the top of the dike, and then the little wall that stood on top of the dike. So if anybody knows about what time, I'm figuring 11:15, 11:20, 11:25, something like
It
that.
was, yeah, it was between 11:15 and about 11:45. So somewhere in that time frame, the dam gave out at that point. Does anybody have any questions about the 50th, about maybe what we're thinking about the exhibit or any of that?
I have a little story of dark humor the night of the
Gosh.
flood. I had a former sister-in-law that was living up at Rochford at the time, and they were growing a little bit of weed on the back stoop. And some of you that are natives remember Stan Zakinski. Stan went up and arrested them late afternoon. And when he got the two of them into Rapid City, it was about the time that the information came that the dam broke. And so he immediately let them go to respond to that. And consequently, they never were rearrested.
Corey, we have a comment. Someone would like to see us look into, from David Super, look into the FEMA trailers that were located in neighborhoods. He's indicating that some of those stayed for quite some time after the actual event of itself.
And I wonder if that might be traceable through newspaper articles. I'm sure that would have been a thing where they're like, well, the final FEMA trailer disappeared. So hopefully I can track that down. Kyle hasn't necessarily been informed that he's looking into FEMA yet once he's done with the other thing, but we are getting there.
If he's attending today's program, he has been.
Right, now he knows.
Gene LeBrun again, on those FEMA trailers, shortly after the flood, we were charged of finding property where those trailers could be placed. So we put out a notice, we'd like to have some vacant lots available. And the response was great. We had many people come forward with vacant lots, or vacant large lots, or even half blocks. And FEMA moved many of their trailers in, and they were kept here for a long time. And even today, if you drive around, go out Sheridan Lake Road between Jackson Boulevard and Arrow Country Club, on the right-hand side, you see a bunch of smaller homes. Those were all flood homes that were taken out of the floodway and relocated there to handle some of the overflow population. But again, I'd be happy to visit more length with you on that issue.
Corey, why don't you maybe give a little bit of a sneak peek of some of the concepts of what we're talking about doing within the museum itself in 2022?
Sure. So the exhibit itself will be located in our temporary exhibit gallery at the end of the museum. We have been doing a lot of research into how to safely present information about the flood to the public. Because this flood was so disastrous, because it was a huge tragedy, and because there is a still large group of the community that remembers the flood occurring, we do need to be careful about what information we place where within the exhibit. So what we are hoping to do is have two semi-separate areas where people can choose to walk into that second area and learn more about the immense tragedy of the flood versus getting the general information. It'll still have a lot of good information in the general area, but there is going to be a separate aspect to it. This is museum protocol. We have worked with the 9/11 Museum and the Oklahoma City Museum to create this protocol, and that's why we are doing it that way. We are planning on doing a large piece of information about the leaders, information that may not have been known before. We are also going to be presenting a lot of information about the Vision Fund. We will be talking about, hopefully about FEMA. We will be discussing the positives that came out of the flood, the positive aspects of how Rapid City recovered and how Rapid City bounced back. while still remembering what was lost. Does that work, Troy, or am I too general still?
I mean, that depends on what the audience thinks, I guess, if they want more detail than that. I'm sorry, I'm writing something down from the chat here, so I wasn't paying as close attention. I guess what's important for all of you to know is that it's not all perfectly set in place yet. We have a good idea of the amount of space that we can dedicate to it. We definitely have a good idea of the types of themes. But again, I think that, again, that's why this year we're so focused on listening to what all of you have to say as community members, you know, what you think are the important themes that we need to get communicated out. I know that I was at the memory walk for the Friends of Rapid City Parks on Sunday. And the challenge here is that there's less and less people who actually experience the event. And a lot of our communication is based on personal experience and knowledge versus how is our communications and memories in the community places. I use as an example, some of you speak as Leonard Swanson's friend, but Corey and I didn't know that Leonard Swanson had a memorial plaque over at Memorial Park until a few years ago, because if you go back to that slide that Corey showed, it doesn't say because of what he did during the flood or anything like that. It just says in memory of Leonard Swanson, right? So if you don't know him, if you're a 18-year-old teenager going through Memorial Park, do you know what this man contributed? And so I think we've got some connection opportunities. And so that's part of where I think Sam and I have an opportunity to have the mayor's office, and we can connect as far as what can the library do and what can the journey do.
I'm going to ask Ken and Jean. There was a book put out about the flood. I don't remember the title because I haven't looked at my copy lately. It might have just been Black Hills, but it was an 8.5 by 11, probably 1.5 inches to 2 inches thick. Do you guys have a copy of that? I've got a copy, and I'd be glad to share it with you, Corey, if you'll come to Rapid City.
Are you talking about the blue book? Does it have a blue cover?
Yeah, you've got one.
I've got one here in Pier with me.
Oh, shoot, I thought I'd get you out here.
Dave Super just posted something that I am totally going to talk to the police department and the sheriff's office about. Reconnecting people with their lost property and things that were turned into law enforcement, or the big collection point that was established. I think that could be a fascinating part of a conversation in the future. I've always kind of wondered about that, and I do know a lot of stuff was lost in mud and never recovered. The fire department has the helmet of one of their gentlemen who died on display at the main fire station, but that was recovered years after the flood from the mud. So it could be a lot of the same things. There were big floods in
Yeah, one of our viewers was posting that there was a presentation on the comparison of our flood to one at Big Thompson Dam in Village of Pines. I wrote all that info down, Corey, so we don't lose that.
Okay. Someone just asked, how are the communities in Colorado and Pennsylvania marking their experiences with big floods in 1972? I do know the Pennsylvania one you're talking about. That's the Johnstown flood. There were multiple Johnstown floods, just like there were multiple floods occurring in Rapid City. I've not seen anything on how they are commemorating their experiences, but I will look into it. Obviously, those communities should be starting to think about it right now, for 50 years.
Gene, run one more time. I know the School of Mines was affected by the flood. Harvey Fraser was the president out there with them. I don't know if you've contacted the School of Mines. It really should. They probably have something in their library, and maybe some people around out there that would also help you out.
School of Mines has been a huge part of our research that we've done in the past. They do have bits and pieces of information. Some of it was turned over, I believe, to us already a couple of years ago. And so we do have that information. And then Tom Durkin, who is online right now, has also shared information with me from School of Mines. So that has been very helpful as well.
Corey, Eileen F. The hospital also, the hospital has a lot of records in their archives. I looked at those probably about 20, 25 years ago, some very interesting stories. I don't believe they'd be subject to HIPAA laws because HIPAA wasn't in place at that time. So that might be another place that you would look for information.
And the big blue book that Bill Casper was talking about does have reports from different hospitals in the area and about the flood. But we are also working with a hospital on getting other information as well.
And I think it's okay that we share, Corey, that prior to the pandemic, the hospital had agreed to help us. And, we had a lot of people who were willing to be engaged, and we sort of kept up with Zoom meetings, like with the police department, sheriff's department and folks, but it's gone a little slower because of all things pandemic, COVID. But I guess part of what we want to communicate is we're still on it.
Yeah. And of course, obviously the hospital had to step away from helping us do research to battle COVID-19. And so we give props to them for making that a priority.
Hi, Corey. First of all, I wanted to thank you for doing this. You're so young, and we need to remember. And I mean, there's not too many people here. I know it's because of COVID, and we have social distancing still. But I wanted to let you know that my family, the Leonard Swanson family, recently was interviewed by an author who's writing a 50th anniversary book. And his name is Eric Abrahamson. Do you know him?
Yes, we've worked with him before. So yeah.
Oh, so he's writing a book. And so I also heard through Eric that Don Barnett is writing a 50th anniversary book. So if you haven't talked to either of them about possible, things that you don't know that you can include in the Journey Museum tribute.
Well, thank you for letting me know that. I did know about Eric Abrahamson. He and Troy and I have been in communication. And then Don Barnett, we communicate with him quite often as well. He's not mentioned a book to me yet, but I'm not surprised because he has so much information in his brain that he just is so willing to share. And that's very important.
One thing, those of us who were here before the flood, my partner and I were just driving around town yesterday afternoon, and we were talking to ourselves and trying to imagine what Rapid City would look like today if there had never been a flood. Considering the Greenway and what's in the Greenway, including the Civic Center, the Journey, many other places, it's hard to imagine what our town would look like if there hadn't been a flood.
I could not even possibly imagine what Rapid City would look like because I've seen the photos of the before. And I having only had lived in Rapid City for about 5 years, it just is a little, it's a little mind-boggling to me. And it's almost it's scary in a way to imagine that because we're so lucky to have this green space. We're so lucky to have all of these beautiful areas that we can take advantage of, and to sit there and wonder if those would still exist otherwise is something a little bit, it's a little scary. It's a little worrisome sometimes.
So it's always awkward for this particular program because we always want to be very respectful of time. We know we've gone kind of over our normal programming timelines, but we'll definitely be available here for you folks that are in the theater. And for those of you online, I posted a link to a survey for the flood. And of course, obviously, we're just available to be talked to. So I want to thank everybody who signed in online. I want to thank the folks that came in here. And thank you all. Somehow, some way, the journey continues. Rapid City moves forward. So thank you all for being here today.